When the night is over, Barack Obama will be staring at what could well be a long final 2 years in office. It's voting day, and the Republicans are poised to keep the House of Representatives and take the Senate, perhaps. With unemployment on the slide, the U.S. economy growing at its fastest rate in nearly a decade, and the introduction of universal health care coverage fading as a campaign issue, why is the tide swinging against the Democrats? Well, key to the answer is the president himself. Many candidates from his party have tried to distance themselves from an Obama that's clearly more popular abroad than at home. We'll ask our panel why, and also whether there's a broader problem with U.S. politics. After all, it's the fourth time in less than a decade that the electorate could vote out the party in power, either from Congress or the White House. We'll also see how the latest swing of the pendulum will affect Washington's engagement with the rest of the world. Today, in the France 24 debate, we're asking, is it a referendum on Obama? With us from Washington, Republican campaign strategist Dan Hazelwood. Welcome back to the France 24 debate. Welcome from New York, Democratic Party campaign strategist Hank Scheinkopf. You can read Josh Krashauer's Against the Grain column in the National Journal. Welcome back, sir. And joining us here in the studio, political scientist Amy Green, the author of America After Obama, the France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation. And you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yes, the polls suggest that Republicans could have their biggest majority in the House of Representatives since the 1940s, while the Democrats' 6-seat majority in the Senate is, well, in peril. Real Clear Politics' latest poll giving the Republicans a 2-seat majority with 8 up for grabs. That's the conservative estimate of things. Josh Krashauer, let me ask you the question we put in the introduction. Your unemployment is down. You have the kind of growth we would kill for here in Europe. What's going on?
Well, this is an election that's shaping up to be about the about management and the president's management of a lot of key issues that have taken place in the second term, whether it's the management of his healthcare law and the healthcare website that got off to such a shaky start, whether it's management of foreign policy and the growth of terrorism and ISIS in the Middle East, and some real skepticism among Americans on whether he's handling foreign policy effectively. The Ebola anxiety that's taken place over the last month or two in this country, which has offered has underscored a certain sense of that anxiety out there. And there's also in some of these swing states some anxiety over border security and immigration, which was once seen as a Democratic strength, but Republicans have been running against the president on immigration because of his lack of managing the border and being on top of things. So this is really a referendum on the president's and the Democratic Party's management of government. And voters aren't in love with the Republican Party, but they're poised to send a referendum on the president and the Democratic Party's management of how government has been run.
Hank Scheinkopf, you agree?
No, I do not. I don't believe this is a referendum on the Democratic Party at all. I think this is a referendum on incumbents in a political system that has become less stable over the years. We need to remember that there's only 2 times in recent memory when the party of the incumbent president has picked up seats. It was during the Clinton administration was one, and during Bush 2 was another. So this is a referendum on incumbents. And by the way, there are a lot of governors up who are also going to be in trouble. Florida is a classic example. Rick Scott may go down to Charlie Crist, and there are a whole bunch of others. This is not about Democrats. This is about incumbents, because party identification, frankly, is less significant as a voting device than it's ever been.
Dan Hazelwood?
Hank is absolutely wrong. We're going to have 98% of incumbents get reelected today in America at all levels. Governors like Rick Scott in Florida, Rick Schneider in Michigan, Republican governors in many states, not all of them are going to get reelected. In the House of Representatives, Republicans have a number of members in difficult to win seats, and in seats that Obama carried. They're going to win easily this election. Frank Lobiano in South Jersey, which is a labor union, environmental Democratic district, he's going to cruise easily to victory. This is absolutely a referendum on 2 things: the anxiety in our country about the economy, which is universal and has been going on for a few years, and then a utter rejection of people in faith in Obama's ability to manage the government. He has demonstrated incompetence on issue after issue. And it's really disappointing to even the Democrat base, where we're going to see turnout problems in a lot of places for the Democrats, because there's just a lack of faith that he can do the basic competence of managing the government, much less pursue the ideological policies he supports.
All right, Amy Green, explain this for a worldwide audience here. It's midterm elections. There's governor's races. There's local races. How much of it is local and how much of it is a referendum on Obama?
Well, it's clear that with the intervention of outside groups, with the incredible financing of campaign ads, there has been a clear exerted attempt to make this a referendum on Obama. Surely the American public is frustrated with a broken political system, with increased polarization. Of course, they will attribute some of that blame to the chief executive of government. Of course, Obama has proven to have communication problems since the beginning of his first term. Those haven't necessarily resolved themselves. But there's also the factor of when you have millions and millions of dollars of negative ads in local races across the country making this about Obama. Of course, that helps to shape the debate and bring this from a local issue to one which is a referendum on Obama. And of course, if we see some of these runoff elections taking place, this is where you're going to start to see the local issues really coming to bear, because Obama won't be present in a runoff election. It will really become about the local issues of the voters participating in those elections.
Ooh, whether or not those those runoff elections remain local. That's an interesting point, especially if the balance in the Senate hangs by a thread. Now, in toss-up states, many candidates distancing themselves from the president and refusing his services on the campaign trail. Solange Mougin has more.
They belong to Barack Obama's political party, but these candidates say they're against the president when it comes to issues like gun control or the environment. This candidate is against Obama's energy policies. She's campaigning for coal worker jobs. And if elected, she said she'll shut the lights off at the White House. One of the most vocal candidates against the president is Allison Lundergan Grimes. A staunch advocate for the right to bear arms, she shoots in her TV ads.
I'm not Barack Obama. I disagree with him on guns, coal, and the EPA.
Grimes is in a tough Senate race in Kentucky against a Republican Party leader, Mitch McConnell. And while she has come out in favor of programs like Obamacare and is pro-choice, Grimes is quick to underline how she and the president differ.
The president and I disagree on energy. His energy philosophy is wrong for Kentucky, making sure especially that we preserve the Second Amendment.
Democratic Party candidates in these midterm elections have had to grapple with the president's low popularity ratings. 2/3 of voters feel he's failed when it comes to the economy. So instead of inviting the Obamas to join her on the campaign trail, she called on former President Bill Clinton to take the edge off voters' disappointment.
I don't think a lot of people thought he did all the things that he needed to do, or he took some wrong approaches.
Grimes even went so far as to skirt the question of whether she voted for Obama in the past presidential elections.
Our Constitution grants privacy at the ballot box for a secret ballot.
Animosity that Obama may have gotten used to, even if it generally comes from across the aisle.
All right, lots of reactions, by the way, coming in. Zachary Miller, who writes on Facebook, the main problem has been the administration's failure to communicate its accomplishments against a consistent barrage of right-wing propaganda. Josh Kraschauer, how much has money weighed on the voters' decisions?
Well, we've seen a record amount of outside money spent in the 2014 elections, but both sides have spent, both sides, outside groups at least, have spent fairly evenly. So you've seen tens of $millions of campaign ads in North Carolina being spent on both sides, and there's a very, very minimal difference between which party has the advantage. So it's been something of a nuclear arms race in which lots of money are going into these big battleground Senate races. Republicans are matching Democrats, Democrats are matching Republicans. They're each catching up with each other. But the money isn't making a difference into which party has an advantage. They're needing to keep up to spend and to contest the messages on the airwaves, but it's been essentially a neutralized battle, and it's just meant a lot of TV stations across the country have been making a lot of money seeing these campaign advertisements air.
Hank Sheinkopf, it's what, the second or third big campaign since the U.S. Supreme Court blew the lid off of limits on campaign spending. How does that change things?
It changes everything. If you consider that in 1996, let's see, I worked for the president then, we spent $120 million on the entire campaign. That's more money than we ever dreamed possible, and probably that amount of money has been spent in 2 or 3 states and Senate races as a total. So money has become the new political party, and that's why I believe this is largely nonpartisan. If the roles were reversed, if there were another candidate in the White House, and this were a similar kind of reaction, and his foreign policy has certainly not been the kind of thing that people feel comfortable about, and this is the first time in a long time where foreign policy has actually mattered to people at all. The attack on him is overwhelming and blistering, but it will happen to the Republicans in the future, and it will happen to other incumbents simply because the new political party is called the Green Party, but it's not about the environment, it's about dough, money.
And do you take the point that Obama's been poor at getting his message across?
He's a lousy communicator. There's no question about that. Plain just old lousy. And the people in his party are doing the right thing by running away from him. But it's not about the party anymore. It's about particular issues in particular places that can be hung around Barack Obama's neck and drag other people down. And it's about power. Money equals power. If you got the dough, you win the election. If you don't, you don't.
Dan Hazelwood, do you miss the old days before when there were limits on campaign spending?
Well, it's kind of funny that Hank and I are 2 old dogs that have been doing this for a couple of decades now. In 1996, I was working at Gingrich, and we were on the receiving end of, I think, $60 million of union attack money on
I remember
on us that year. So there's always been money in American politics. The good news is that both sides have a lot of money to compete. We spent more in this country on candy in the last month, this being Halloween, $2.2 billion in 2 weeks on candy. The whole month together, we spent more on candy than we did on elections this year. So in proportion, this is a giant country, over 300 million people. It's an important thing that we do. Money matters, but money has always mattered, going all the way back to the beginning. Sure. The thing that works best in our country is when both sides have vibrant and aggressive champions, and we've got that. On Hank's side of the aisle, there's a guy named Tom Steyer, who is a incredibly rich guy spending huge amounts of money. I think he might now hold the new record. On my side, there's famously people talk about the Koch brothers. They've spent some money. And then there's on both sides, there are millions of Americans who are contributing $25, $35 to their local campaigns, and they're making a difference too in their local races. So money matters. People are talking, but at the end of the day, and Hank and I see this research every day in our professional lives, there's still chunks of voters who say, yeah, I haven't heard someone talk about what I care about, or I'm not even paying close attention, and it takes that money to interrupt someone's daily life. So that's part of what campaigns are. That's part of how politics is driven. But at the end of the day, when you look at these races, there's parity of money on both sides of the aisle. And that's a good thing, because both sides get a full-throated voice to argue. And that is at the heart of the American system.
All right. Money the American way when it comes to campaigning. Amy Green, you heard Hank Sheinkopf there saying how Obama's proved to be a terrible communicator. Are you surprised when you think back to the Obama who was elected in 2008?
It's surprising when you hear his speeches, when you understand how good Obama is and how good his team is at crafting messages to share the broad outlines of what they aim to accomplish. But when actually comes down to legislating, the message is entirely different. Nonetheless, we do see, for example, Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, has largely been taken out of the equation, or we can imagine that if the Republicans do take both houses of the legislature, that it won't necessarily be a major issue. Why? Because when push comes to shove, a majority of Americans are no longer on repeal Obamacare. They're more basing their intentions on how do we reform it. So although Obama has perhaps a problem with management of his message, he's able to provide results that the American people are content with or see value in pursuing.
He came into office promising that his cabinet would be this Lincoln-style team of rivals.
And it was at the beginning.
But it doesn't seem like that's the case anymore.
Well, no, it seems like Obama has retrenched on his close circle of advisors, has doubled down on that rather than continuing this team of rivals style. This has been one of the criticisms of Obama's management style that we've heard other guests tonight invoke, which is this notion of being a closed person, concentrating on his aides, on his inner circle, without necessarily opening the door to Senate Democrats, to congressional Democrats, to his adversaries in the way that perhaps they would like.
Josh Kraushaar, Is that going to obviously change if the Republicans take power?
Well, that's the big question if Republicans take the Senate. Does the president go through with more executive orders? Most notably, there's been some leaks in the last couple days over immigration and whether he's going to go through with a planned executive order to legalize certain immigrants that are in the country illegally. And that would be, I think that would poison the well a little bit with if Republicans took the majority. There's a lot of stuff where there could be some commonality, whether it's trade, whether it's tax reform, but they certainly need to come to the bargaining table. And if the president decided to spend the last couple of years using more executive power rather than coming to the bargaining table, it would be a certain recipe for gridlock.
So hang on, Josh. You're saying that the president, rather than compromise and take Republicans out to play golf, is going to look more to using more executive decrees?
Well, it's an open question. There's the debate going on within the White House right now, and top Democrats I've talked to are really at odds with what the best strategy is for the president's legacy and for governing over the next couple of years. Does he think he has a Republican partner in Mitch McConnell if he becomes the majority leader to work with and actually accomplish some legacy-building legislation, or does he think that the Ted Cruz's, the very outspoken conservative wing of that Republican caucus, is going to take over and he's going to have the same situation he did in the House a couple years ago? I think there's certainly room with a Republican Congress, and we saw with Bill Clinton, as Hank knows, there was a lot of productive legislation that passed in the second term of Bill Clinton's administration. But it's an open question of whether there's a middle ground that both Obama and a Republican Congress could find if Republicans do take the Senate.
Again, a lot of your reactions coming in. One from Magnus Opus. He says, the oratorical bubble has well and truly burst. Not even a dubious Nobel Prize will save his wasted presidency. Hank Scheinkoff, are you surprised to hear these verdicts coming in from some of the viewers?
First, I think that our colleague who just spoke is right on the mark, and these verdicts are kind of interesting. And I think a lot of it has to do with the communications age, that things move very quickly. You know, Americans, I want to go back to something I said before. Americans generally don't care about foreign policy. They don't vote on it. But when you see people having their heads taken off with knives on television, and it gets to you in seconds on the Internet, it has a very different posture. Can this president show some strength and character to make the American public feel less vulnerable? That's a lot of what is going on. And the money just adds to that sense of the constant reinforcement of this negative image of him. That makes it more likely Republicans won't do business with him. If that's the case, then they both will suffer going into 16. And that will be a very different set of circumstances because the American public will make different decisions.
And we'll pick up on that point when we come back. You're watching the France 24 debate.